Hippocrates is known as the father of modern medicine. Among his most important contributions is how he systematized medicine and medical treatments, disentangling them from religion and superstition, and how he created the world's first medical school by training other young physicians in his methods. It was around 400 BC that Hippocrates developed a treatment for epilepsy. Children and adults were being brought to him, and they would be prescribed a diet of, well, nothing, only water for several days at a time. And that was the world's first ketogenic diet. Hey, I'm Dr. E, and this is the Highway to Health Show.
Are you ready to live ageless? Want to discover alternative health choices, cutting-edge nutrition, and fitness for the entire family? Welcome to Highway to Health Show with your host, Dr. E, the Stem Cell Guy, where Dr. E helps you live ageless. And now, here's your host, Dr. E.
This is episode 4 of the Highway to Health Show. I'm your host, Dr. E, and today we're talking about the keto diet. Well, not just the keto diet, but low-carb dieting in general. I will talk about the differences between Paleo, Keto, Atkins, and Whole30 diets. I'll briefly go over some of the other variants, such as the Bulletproof Diet and the more recent Carnivore Diet. So, without further ado, let's get started. First of all, this whole thing came to me recently. I cook a lot for my family. Some of you who follow us on Instagram probably know. And I don't exactly remember what I did, and I added some orange juice to it. And Evelyn, my wife, turned around and said, "But that's not keto." And that's actually what triggered the whole creation of this episode and calling it Is That Keto? Because there are so many things out there that now we try to understand and to think whether they are ketogenic. So ketogenic means that it promotes or that it creates ketones. And there are many things that are properly ketogenic, and there are many other things which are keto friendly. And there are a lot of things that aren't ketogenic at all. On the contrary, they will kick you out of ketosis. At the beginning of this episode, I spoke a little bit about the keto diets and how it's being used for epilepsy. And as a matter of fact, even Hippocrates back then would use ketogenic diets. Of course, he didn't know he was doing a ketogenic diet. He was just making his patients fast in order to control their seizures and their epilepsy symptoms. And what's really happening is that when you fast, your body is forced to manufacture its own energy. And how does it do it? It grabs the fat that is lying in your body, mostly, around your visceral organs and underneath your skin, so belly fat and all these different areas, and sends it to the liver, and the liver converts it into ketones. And these ketone bodies act, and they can go into their different cells, and they are converted in the mitochondria into energy units. And that's how we continue functioning when we need more energy. Now, what they started seeing is that in these patients, when they were being forced to fast, because ketones are a much cleaner source of cellular fuel than glucose, they were not having as many seizures. Now, of course, they couldn't just stay fasting forever. But so as soon as they started their regular diets again, they saw that many of these symptoms started coming back, and then they started kind of like cycling them and doing all these different things. And of course, we don't have a lot of notes and a lot of evidence of really what happened back in the day. But then early in the 20th century, a lot of researchers, even in France and here in the US, they started they started rethinking this ketogenic diet. And one of the things that they noticed is that it wasn't necessary for patients to fast. What was very important was to decrease or eliminate the input of carbohydrates. So there are 3 basic macronutrients, and it is fats, protein, and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the easiest ones to use. They will be converted in our gut by our microbiome. They will be converted into glucose or different sugars. And these different sugars are absorbed very quickly and very rapidly through our intestines into our bloodstream, and they will very quickly and rapidly feed our cells. Our cells will use up the energy, and they will also create cellular waste. That is why many of these high glucose diets are pro-inflammatory, because our cells are constantly doing this. Now, what happens is that when we get hungry, it is because our cells don't necessarily have all the energy that they need, and they need this little extra boost of energy. So we get hungry. We turn around and we eat something that is high in glucose. So we drink a glass of juice, or we eat some cereal, or we eat some rice or pasta or something like that. And what happens is that our glucose will spike right away because it is rapidly absorbed, but then our pancreas will recognize this and will release insulin into our bloodstream so that all this glucose can enter the different cells and feed them. What starts happening is that as we continue stimulating our body in this manner, and we continue creating all this big influxes of glucose, into our bloodstream, two things are going to happen to our cells. One is they're going to start getting full of glucose, so they're not going to necessarily need all that additional glucose. And second, they're going to stop reacting as well and sufficiently to insulin. So the next time they see an insulin molecule out there, they simply won't open up the cells. So that's going to lead to insulin resistance, which I'm sure you've heard about. And what's going to happen is that all the excess glucose that we have in the cells will start getting converted into fat, and will start being mobilized to our different fat cells, and they will start growing, and we will start getting fatter and fatter. And that's essentially what's currently happening. And that's what we see a lot of with the standard American diet. We're eating too many carbohydrates, too many processed foods, too many very highly sweetened foods. And what's triggering is an excessive amount of carbohydrates. So when we start thinking of it in a different manner, what we're able to do is, if we can remove or eliminate, or at least decrease in an important manner, the amount of carbohydrates that we're consuming, then we will force our cells to start converting our fat. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that even if we eat a little bit of carbohydrates, if we decrease them a lot, let's say we are eating maybe 500-600 grams of carbs in a day, which isn't strange for the standard American diet. Sometimes it's even more than that. And we decrease them, we cut those in half, and we go down to 250 grams of carbs a day. That is still going to be a lot, and that's not going to trigger any production of ketone bodies. We need to go, really, to consider something a low-carb diet, we need to go around 125, 100 grams per day, and even lower than that if we want to consider it a proper keto diet. So those are things that are very important for us to really understand, because the difference is almost night and day. We can decrease the amount, and this is actually what happens with a lot of diets. So they will cut carbs in half, but they will still be well above the threshold. So what's going to happen is that people will be very hungry because you've just decreased the amount of carbohydrate that they're consuming in half, but the decrease is not large enough for ketone production to be triggered. So they're not getting that additional energy that or that different or alternative source of fuel that they should be triggering. That's why it's very important that if you're going to do this, you do it right. You cannot do this kind of thing with keto dieting. This is not the kind of thing that you do 80% of the work and you get 80% of the result, because a lot of the times you do 80% of the work and you get 0% of the result. It is when you go beyond that you actually start getting some of those additional results. So like I said, it's very, very important to understand that. Now, like I said at the beginning, what they noticed is that when we are able to decrease the amount of carbs that we consume on a day-to-day basis, we can go into a state of ketosis. Now, if you get rid of your carbs, or you decrease, importantly, the amount of carbs that you're consuming, then you have to replace them with something else. correct? Because this is a proportion. The lesser the amount of carbs, it will increase the percentage of proteins. It'll increase the percentage of fats. Now, one of the most common mistakes that people make is that when they start cutting their carbs, they will simply increase their protein, but they will not increase their fat. Remember, the ketogenic diet is not that it is low carb. The most important key to a ketogenic diet is that it is high fat. So of course it is low carb, but it has to be high fat. Otherwise, it simply won't be ketogenic, which isn't necessarily the goal in a lot of cases. It doesn't mean that high protein is bad. It just means that if you are really looking to harness the benefits of a keto diet, then you need to go high fat. And there are several ways of doing it. You can start consuming foods that are higher in fat naturally. So coconuts, coconut oil, avocados, whole eggs, whole milk, all these different foods that for so many years we satanized and we thought they were the devil. Now we realize that they're not really that bad, and it's really the hydrogenated fats that are really causing us harm. And it is the carbs that we consume these fats a lot of the times with that are creating these problems for us. So one very important thing to consider is if you're going to be lowering your carbs, you need to increase your fat. An easy way of doing this is to start incorporating certain oils. So you start using a very common one is MCT oil, which is derived from coconut oil. It's a medium chain triglyceride, and you can use that in salad dressings. You can use that in many ways. You can also start increasing the amount of extra virgin olive oil that you use avocado oil, coconut oil. Those are easy ways to increase your fat intake. That's also what brings us or what started making the Bulletproof Diet popular, because what they started advocating was to put butter. So butter from grass-fed cows, to use it and to blend it with your coffee. So instead of using a creamer, you use butter, and it's really tasty. I really like it. I've done that for many years. You do coffee and you blend it with butter. I'll make sure to link to the official Bulletproof recipe, or you can just look up butter coffee online, and you'll be able to see the different ways of doing it. And you also add MCT oils. And the great advantage of this is that it is part of a modified intermittent fast that they present. Now, the great thing about fasting, or what they recognize, is that you don't necessarily need to fast for extended periods of time to go into ketosis. All you really need to do is to stay away from carbs. So if you don't consume carbs and you don't consume protein and you're only consuming fat, you're not triggering certain specific mechanisms in our body that do kick you out of fasting. And thus you're able to kind of trick your body, and that's why they call it biohacking. You're able to trick your body into believing that you are fasting, and you will eventually start producing these ketone bodies. And you do that by having one fat coffee, for instance, in the morning. So you have like a high fat meal, which is this coffee, which a lot of times is 600, 700, 800 calories, sometimes even more than that, and that'll keep you full and satiated until lunch. And then at lunch you can have a proper meal, low carb, and then you have an early dinner, and then again you fast the following night. So for instance, if you have dinner at 6 and you go to bed at 8 or at 9 or at 10, and then you wake up at 6 and you only have one of these bulletproof coffees or fat coffees in the morning, and then you don't eat until lunchtime at, let's say, 1, or noon, for instance, to make it easy for me, you fasted again for a straight 18 hours. So you're only eating in a 6-hour window, and you're fasting for 18. And this is what a lot of people do in terms of intermittent fasting, which is a good way to start kind of like easing into it. There are certain caveats. I don't want to make this sound like a straight up guide I'm available if you have specific questions. I'll be happy to address some of those, as many as I can, over social media or on my website. Just leave us a comment there. It's always very, very important, especially if you're a woman, especially if you are pregnant or nursing. Make sure to check with your doctor before you make any important changes in diet, before you start fasting or even consider fasting or anything like that. This is not medical advice. I'm just letting you know what we know so far. If you're confident and you want to give it a shot, we'll be happy to provide some more information. But then again, you have to do your own research. We're here to provide some of this information. It's actually a lot simpler. I just want to make sure that you don't just jump into the deep end without really knowing what the potential consequences are of all these different things. Now, in order to compare, like I said, if we wanted to be a keto diet, we need to increase our fat. However, there are other variables. There are other ways of improving our diets, but they all involve lowering our carbs. That's the number one thing that we need to do. We need to consume less carbs. That's for sure. So our goal at the very least should be to stay below 100 grams per day. These are net carbs per day. But like I said, ideally you want to go much further down. If you want to do keto, you want to do 20 grams, 50 grams in certain cases. When you're fat adapted, you can get away with that. But if you want to go into keto, you want to stay below 20. And now, when you want to compare, so for instance, if you want to talk about keto and paleo, what's the difference between keto and paleo? Well, keto is basically a lower carb version of paleo. Paleo is supposed to be the way our ancestors ate. So they place a very special emphasis on consuming high quality, nutrient dense foods and minimizing chemicals and toxins. So obviously anything that is GMO, that is not organic, that didn't exist back then, that is processed, that is made in a plant or in a factory, is not considered paleo, right? But they don't necessarily place an emphasis on increasing the amount of fat that you consume. Obviously, the number of carbs are very low, but they do allow certain starchy vegetables. They do allow fruit. They do allow honey, which we know are high in a lot of different sugars. Now, the thing here that we need to consider is back then, fruits were seasonal. So we would not be consuming most fruits in winter and even in fall. Fruits would start being consumed in spring and would continue to be consumed in summer. And of course, our ancestors, whenever they found a tree that was giving fruit, would probably just completely gorge on them for that period of time. But then they wouldn't take them home and freeze them so they could do berry smoothies throughout the winter. So that's something important to consider. They don't advocate. As a matter of fact, in paleo community, dairy is not permitted. So even butter, yogurt, milk, anything like that is not allowed. While it is allowed in the keto community, because it's a very easy way to increase your consumption when you're consuming grass-fed dairy. It's a very easy way to increase the amount of protein and the amount of fat that you're consuming with virtually no carbs. Of course, there are certain sugars in milk, so you need to keep that in mind. You're not going to completely base your diet on cheese and milk, but it is mostly fat and protein. They obviously also do not advocate or allow for any sweeteners. So any artificial sweeteners are not considered paleo. Now, a very important distinction here, and the same thing happens with keto, is that we're starting to see a lot of paleo and a lot of keto junk food. So we see the keto brownies and the keto cookies and the keto this and the keto that and the paleo pancakes. And the thing is, the whole purpose of this is to start or to go back to eating a less refined, a more natural, less processed way of eating. So all of these Franken foods, doesn't matter if they're high fat and low carb, they should still be avoided. And that's something very important that I do want to emphasize. When people start converting and start becoming or eating keto or eating paleo or eating all these things, it's very easy to kind of have that inclination to find your comfort foods or your little desserts or your little rewards. And growing up, I had the same thing. Whenever, if you behaved well, you would give yourself this little reward and I had a good workout, so I can have a little bit of ice cream. And I still do it from time to time, to be honest with you. But in reality, when you stop and you think about it, and this is actually something funny that I talk to my wife a lot all the time, when we have these little Parmesan cheese crackers or we have something like that, little snacks that we give to our son. He's 1.5. Sometimes when he's being good, she will give him something, and I said, let's try not to educate him that way. And I will always kid, and I'll say he's not a dolphin, so we shouldn't reward good behavior with food. Because a lot of the times, at least it was in my case as I was growing up, that was one way that I got anchored in my mind. So now it is, I've been good. It's time to reward myself, and I can eat junk. And in reality, that should be the last thing in our mind. So it is very important to consider that. Keep that in mind. Not just because it is high fat and low carb does it mean that it's healthy. I remember when I was, oh my God, this was awful. But when I was a vegan, and thankfully I've been a recovering vegan for many years. That was a short phase. So when I was vegan, I remember that there were so many things, and this one day I got super excited when I realized that Oreos were vegan. And then when you stop and you think that, Oreos are vegan and so are Coca-Colas, you realize that not because you're following a supposedly healthy, which I'm not saying that being vegan is healthy, right? But supposedly healthy lifestyles, there will always be different companies and different interests trying to position their products, which a lot of the times are junk, for that particular group of people. So in that case, it was veganism. Now it is the keto, the paleo community. So don't necessarily fall for it. Read labels, look into that, and try to stay obviously as close as you can to unprocessed and natural foods. Continuing down this path, if we want to compare, for instance, keto with Atkins, keto is basically a lower protein version of Atkins. Atkins was the original diet popularized by Dr. Atkins. And Dr. Atkins was a cardiologist, and he saw a lot of the research from the early 20th century, and he saw that it was being used to treat patients with epilepsy. But he noticed that a lot of these patients also started losing a lot of weight. So he started doing the research, and he started developing this diet where he increased a lot of the fats, and the main focus of his diet was to remove as many carbs as possible for the diet. So the focus here was on losing weight, and it was for a short, the diet was supposed to be for a short period of time or a limited period of time. So you would go into this super intense diet to lose a lot of weight, and then slowly you would start kind of like going back to your usual eating regimes and obviously modifying a couple of things. So, but the most important thing or the most emphasis that they placed was in removing a lot of the starches. So at the very beginning, they would remove everything that was carbohydrate based. So any pastas, breads, even potatoes, yams, carrots, all of the vegetables that were high in carbohydrates would be eliminated. So as a result, and this was a diet that was also, at least at the beginning, catered to men. So it was advertised as eat all the bacon you can, eat all the steaks that you can, eat all the eggs that you can. That's fine as long as you don't eat the hash browns that come with it. And that was pretty much the message. So what happened is that we were eating, or people in the Atkins diet started eating a lot of meat, and many of these meats weren't very high quality. They were grain-fed meats, they were processed meat, they were cured meats, they weren't cooking them right. So you also know know that if you grab, for instance, all these bacons, and you grab all these different kinds of meats and you char them, that is also pro-inflammatory. So that's not necessarily the best thing you can do for yourself. They have different phases, so the diet goes through different phases, and they start modifying the macros and the proportions to how much you can eat. But the main goal for this was always a temporary weight loss. Out of all the diets that we're discussing, all the low carb options that we're talking about today, this is probably the one that I would recommend the least, because it doesn't place any emphasis at all in food quality or in sustainability. So this is not, and it was not designed even from the beginning to be a sustainable long-term way of life, which is really the only way that we are going to be able to become healthier in terms of what we're eating. So that's why I don't advocate it a lot. A lot of people still use it. It's a very easy way to get started. You basically just get rid of everything that comes from a plant, and you eat a lot of animal and processed foods, high fat, and that's pretty much it. But it's still, I do prefer to place emphasis on quality of the foods that we're consuming. And then we have the other extreme. So the other extreme, something that has become very popular, but it's also, at least from my point of view, people who do it consistently and the people who are involved with this, they claim that it is sustainable and long term and all these different things. But I find that Whole30 is very, very, very restrictive. So keto is almost a lower carb version of Whole30. Whole30 does allow a little bit more carbs than keto here, but the focus here is on eliminating food groups for a 30-day nutritional reset. Whole30 is a really, really good way to kind of like reboot yourself. If you've been abusing your body for a certain period of time, if you've been neglecting your health, if you've been not being very careful, if you want to really kind of like figure out what's ailing you, this is recommended for people, for instance, with autoimmune disorders. They can go into Whole30, and that will remove a lot of the most common food allergens, and that'll allow them to heal for a certain period of time, and then little by little they will be able to start reincorporating certain things. Whole30, when compared to keto, Whole30 is a lower fat, higher carb diet. Still, it will not go over the 100 grams per day threshold, rarely. It doesn't focus a lot on the ratios of the different fat, protein, and carbohydrates, but it does go very detailed into the types of food. All of the dairy is banned here. All of the sweeteners are banned. And keto, when we talk about keto, there are a lot of different sweeteners that are allowed here. Mostly you will talk about erythritol and xylitol and monk fruit, never Splenda and things like that, NutraSweet or any of that crap. So those are probably the main differences. Now, when we talk about something that is interesting is that in all these different diets that I spoke about today, seafood is allowed in all of them and actually encouraged, especially high fatty fish. So salmon, sardines, anchovies, all these different fish that have a high fat content that are lower on the food chain. And the reason that you want to eat fish that is lower in the food chain is because they will have less mercury contamination. And that really doesn't matter at this point whether they're farmed or wild. The amount of mercury that the fish have, the amount of fat you definitely want to have wild. So the difference between wild salmon and farmed salmon is night and day. Same thing with sardines. Eggs are allowed in all of them. Again, I want to very much emphasize the importance of buying and consuming. They call them free range eggs. So these hens, they're allowed out. They're allowed to graze. They eat some grass. They eat some grains. They eat some bugs. They have a varied diet. They are not just in a cage. They get some sun, which is also very important. You can actually see the difference. You get some of these eggs, and they might be organic, but if if the hens aren't going out and are getting all these different nutrients, you will see the yolks are yellow. And when you have all these high quality eggs, the yolks are orangey. And that means it has more polyphenols, it has more antioxidants, it has healthier fats. If you've ever had a duck egg, you will see that orangey, even kind of like a reddish tinge in the yolk, and they're super yummy. And they're allowed in all of these different diets. There are certain types of more restrictive diets, specifically for certain autoimmune disorders. For instance, if you were coming in with an autoimmune disorder, you wanted to find certain things out, you would definitely want to cut out eggs as well at the beginning, just to make sure, because there's a lot of people that do have allergies to eggs. But in these main diets that we're discussing, and assuming you don't have an autoimmune disorder, you don't have an allergic reaction to most of these foods, I would still keep them on. Dairy is allowed in keto and in Atkins, but it is not allowed in Paleo and in Whole30. Meat. In keto, everything is good, processed and unprocessed. In Atkins, same thing. Both Paleo and Whole30 talk about unprocessed, but again, I want to emphasize the importance, especially if we're talking about beef, of eating grass-fed. Grass-fed, grass-finished. A lot of the times you're going to see that some of these cows are being fed grass, and then the last couple of weeks they're fed grains in order to fatten them. And this makes sense from a production standpoint for the farmers, because they sell them by the pound. So the fatter they are, the more money they get per cow. However, the difference in nutritional profiles from the different kinds of beef is very, very important. And it's very obvious. That this also includes game meats, so you can see some bison, you can see venison, you can see lamb, you can see all these different game meats that are allowed in all of them. Vegetables. In keto, you can have low carb, non-starchy only. So you're talking about lettuces and spinaches and onions and all these different non-starchy vegetables that you have, especially all the cruciferous vegetables. So broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kales. These are good in keto. Paleo allows all and places moderation on starchy vegetables. So you won't be eating a lot of potatoes, for instance, and you will be moderating your consumption of carrots and yams and things like that. Atkins, same thing, low carb, non-starchy only, and Whole30 allows all of them, including the starchy ones. Fruit, again, in keto, it is very limited low sugar fruits, mostly berries. So when you talk about keto, you're going to see that the fruits that they do emphasize are mostly berries. That also includes some other fruits, which a lot of people consider vegetables, such as avocados and tomatoes, mostly. So do keep that in mind. They are very low in carbs. But for instance, an avocado, for certain people, if they're not fat adapted and they have a whole avocado, that can kick them out of ketosis, because it does include a certain number of carbs. It does have certain amount of fiber in it as well, which brings the net content of carbs down. By the way, if you're reading labels and you're starting to get confused about these things, net carbs is the total number of carbs that a food has minus the total grams of fiber that it has. So if you have a specific food that lists 12 grams of carbs, and out of those 8 grams are fiber, then you have a food with 4 grams of net carbs. And that's the number that you should be looking at, because fibers we do not absorb. Fibers stay in our gut. They feed our gut bacteria, but we don't absorb them. So I think that's pretty much it. Oh, another important one, nuts and seeds. So nuts and seeds are limited in keto. They are allowed in Paleo. They're again limited in Atkins, and they are allowed in Whole30. Grains are not allowed in any of them. So you're not going to see any of these diets calling for rice dishes or calling for anything, granolas or cereals or any of these grains. And frankly, there's really no nutritional need for us to be consuming them. Same thing with legumes. So you're not going to be seeing beans, and you're not going to be seeing lentils in any of these different dishes. Coffee. Coffee has become popular, especially in the keto community, thanks to Bulletproof. And so obviously, keto, it is allowed. Most of the time, what you can add to it as well is heavy cream, butter, or MCT oil, or any non-calorie sweeteners allowed that you can find. In Paleo, you can have black coffee, but no cream or artificial sweeteners are allowed. Same thing in Atkins. Atkins limits the amount of coffee that you can drink, whether it's black or not, because of the caffeine. They have this observation on caffeine. And Whole30 does allow it, except for the creams and the sweeteners. So you can have your coffee at Whole30. And alcohol. Alcohol is not really recommended in any of them, but keto are okay, especially if you're talking about certain wines, especially the dry wine variety, which are low carb, and certain unflavored liquors, which won't kick you out of ketosis if you have maybe one a day. Paleo thinks very much the same way. Both Atkins and Whole30, they discourage the consumption of alcohol altogether. Now, why should you be considering a switch to a ketogenic diet? Well, as we said at the beginning of this episode, the carbs are rapidly converted into glucose and our cells use it rapidly. And that's why we get super hungry and then we eat and we feel okay and then we crash. Because what happens is that we're very rapidly bringing in a lot of glucose and we're very rapidly putting it inside our cells. So we get hungry again. And that's why, if you work in corporate America or anywhere else, if you work in an office and you see that people go out for their lunch break and everyone who eats these rice dishes, these burritos, these different high carb meals, what's going to happen is that you see them back at their desk at around 3 p.m. and they're struggling to stay awake and they have to go grab an extra cup of coffee because they try to caffeinate their way to till the end of the day because they're crashing. They get hungry, they consume a lot of carbs, that increases their blood glucose, that increases their insulin. And by increasing their insulin, that wipes out the glucose, that puts it inside the cells, and they crash because, again, they don't have circulating glucose. Now, what's the difference is that when we consume fats, or not so much consume fats, but when we don't consume carbohydrates with our meals, what's going to happen is that we're forcing our liver to start converting our fats into ketones. And this is a slower process, but it's also a process that is not as dramatic, or the result is not as dramatic or as rapid as it is when we release all this glucose into our bloodstream. So our energy levels don't really spike. Our ketones go to a certain level and they will start nourishing our cells. Our cells will be able to use it up. It doesn't burn as fast and it doesn't burn as dirty. It's a lot cleaner burning in terms of cellular waste. So it keeps us fuller for longer. You're going to see that a lot of people who do keto diets, they probably eat once a day. I normally will have 1 or 2 meals a day. I can a lot of the times go with 1 meal. I do a lot of fasts. I do 36-hour fasts. I do 72-hour fasts, and this is also, once you get to a certain level of fat adaptation, it has other benefits which we can explore in a different episode. But the reason is we don't necessarily need to be eating 3 times a day. You can. I'm not saying that you won't be eating, but you don't necessarily have to do it. Your hunger will dictate when and if you need to eat again. It's no longer, well, you need to eat because it's dinner time. You eat when you're hungry and you stop when you're not. And it's as simple as that. There's really no easier way. I remember when I was a vegan, oh my God, I was hangry all the time. It doesn't matter how much I ate. I was always thinking about my next meal. I had to be planning everything around where I was going to be going. When I was traveling, I had my assistant look up restaurants in the area that were like vegan friendly or straight up vegan so that I could make sure to have a vegan meal. And it was just painful. It was just very, very difficult. I couldn't believe that I put up with it for that long. Because in reality, it really biologically doesn't make any sense to me right now when I understand this. So if you would like to get started and to learn more about ketogenic diets and how they work, feel free to visit our website. So the show notes for this episode are going to be at dre.show. That's DRE.show/004. And I'm going to have links there to the different things that we've been talking about, to the different resources for you to learn more about these different diets. And you will have a chance to send me your questions. Some of those questions we might use for follow-up episodes. If we do use them in follow-up episodes, I'll send you a cool gift. And there are also a couple of different things that you can do. So our actionable steps for this episode, if you want to get started, if you want to start changing the way you eat and maybe moving more towards a healthier, more sustainable long-term regimen or eating routine, here's what I recommend you do. First, track your macros for a week. Before you do any change, at least get a snapshot of what you're currently eating. A lot of the times, and this has been proven time and again, that we overestimate how good we're eating. And in reality, most of the time we get shocked by it. The easiest way, there's an app and it's a web service. It's called Chronometer. And I'll make sure to link it here as well. They have a free account and they have a premium account. 99% of the time you can get away with the free account perfectly fine. It has a huge database of different foods that you can start logging in for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, in between. And they also have this huge database of users that have been submitting specific recipes and store-bought products. So if you live in the US or Canada, most likely is whatever product you go to a store and you want to buy, it'll have the exact breakdown in terms of carbs, proteins, fats, and a lot of the different micronutrients as well. So do that for a week. I think you will be surprised. And don't check like every 2 seconds. Just use it. Just log everything. Use it like an idea dump almost, and just log everything that you're eating. And at the end of the week, review it. And it's going to be eye-opening. You're going to realize how much you're eating of certain things and how little you're eating of others, and how often you're eating a lot of the times. And it also logs your times and when you're hungry and not. And that's going to be a very, very important eye-opening activity that you can do. Then once you have that, then you determine your net carb goal. And like I said, if you want to start transitioning, what I suggest you aim for about 125 grams of net carbs to begin with. Don't try to be the overachiever, because that's the easiest recipe for failure. Don't say, you know what, I'm just going to do 20 grams of carbs if you've been doing 600 grams of carbs every day so far. So decide where you're going to go, and then you start working backwards. You can start creating meal prep menus. You can start planning your meals. You can start taking certain steps to make sure that you stay within those limits. Most important thing, be patient with yourself. Once you start doing this dietary changes, you will start feeling better, but it's going to take a while. You've been eating a different way for a certain amount of years. You cannot expect to change it and 2 days later start dropping weight. Now, a lot of people do drop a lot of weight initially when they switch to keto, and this is due to the fact that they're no longer retaining as much fluid. So that's the easiest way to drop weight, and that serves a purpose, because a lot of people get motivated, but then they plateau for a couple of weeks, and that's completely normal. Be patient with yourself. Take it easy. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. You've heard that 1,000 times, but it really is true. And then the other thing is, and something that I've been doing, especially, and I have a lot of experience working with children, especially with autistic children. And one of the things that benefits them as well is a ketogenic diet, but a hard way for them to get into nutritional ketosis, given their pickiness for eating, given that they have to be very strict with what they eat and the times, and restricting all the amount of calories and eating more fats. So what seems to work very well for them, and it's something that I use as well, are exogenous ketones. So there are different salts, different products. Most of them are little sachets and powders, and you dissolve them in water, and they're the ketone salts, and they're not to emphasize this. They're not the long-term solution. You don't consume exogenous ketones and not change your diet and keep that up and then consider yourself in ketosis. That's simply not the way it works. But if you want to get like a head start and you want to get a boost right off the gate, then this is something you can consider. I'm going to link a few of those as well in the description for this episode. Once again, that's going to be at dre.show, dre.show/004. And another very important thing is not to-dos. So your not to-do list is go full-blown keto right away. Don't just, like I said a couple of minutes ago, don't just jump from a completely regular standard American diet full of carbs and Cheetos and pizza and ice cream, and then decide that you're going to go full-blown keto and have 10 grams of carbs a day, because the keto flu on that is going to be terrible. Plus, you're not going to have fun. Plus, you've never really done it, so you're probably going to fail even just at choosing the kind of food. So don't try to go straight full-blown keto right away. Second, don't do extensive fasts. If you haven't fasted before, don't just say, you know what, I'm just going to fast for a day or two and see where that leads, because it's not safe and it's not the smart thing for you to do, especially, like I said at the beginning, if you are pregnant and or nursing. Don't even think of that. And the third, just as important thing, don't go into this and go to the supermarket and buy every single package of keto and paleo junk food. Honestly, stay away from those things. It is much better if you have a sweet craving, something like that. Just have some non-sugar chocolate, dark chocolate. So anything above 80%. Not a lot of people really like that, or that won't really take the edge of a lot of people. Try some peanut butter, almond butter, or even just have a small piece of fruit, have some berries, have something like that, but avoid the junk food, avoid the keto cookies, avoid the keto pancakes, avoid all that stuff, because in reality, it's not helping you get closer to your keto goals. Those, a lot of the times we see like super intense keto people who've been doing keto for several years, who are completely fat adapted. It's fine. They can have those and it won't kick them out of it. But if you're just starting, that's going to completely sabotage your gains. So I think that's it for today. I probably went a little bit longer than I wanted to, but if you have any questions, make sure to send them our way, and I'll be happy to address them either in the comments in our blog, or where you see the episode notes, or in a future episode. And I look forward to hearing from you. If you like this episode, remember to subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps us a lot in order to get noticed in iTunes. If you're going in there and leaving your reviews and subscribing to it. So thank you so much for supporting the show, and I'll see you in the next episode. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Dr. E's Highway to Health show, helping you learn the science of living ageless. Did you enjoy the show? Please like, share, and subscribe where you listen to podcasts. Dr. E wants to hear from you. Go to dre.show. Again, that's dre.show. Until next time, this is Dr. E's Highway to Health, helping you live ageless.